The fluorescent lights of Riverside Academy flickered as Marcus Webb pushed his cleaning cart down the empty hallway, the wheels squeaking in rhythm with his tired breathing. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Friday night, and most of the students had long since left for their weekend plans. Marcus preferred the late shift, less noise, fewer people, and more time to think about the engineering degree he was working toward online, one painful credit at a time. At 42, Marcus knew he was older than most students pursuing their first degree, but life hadn't given him the luxury of traditional education. He'd spent 20 years in the military, seen things that still haunted his dreams, and come home to find that his skills didn't translate well to civilian life. Janitorial work wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave him access to the university library where he studied during his breaks. He was a tall man, built solid from years of military discipline, with dark skin, graying hair at his temples, and hands scarred from a lifetime of hard work. The students barely noticed him. He was just part of the background, another invisible worker keeping their world clean and functional. Marcus was emptying trash bins on the third floor of the science building when he heard it. A crash, followed by a muffled cry of pain. He abandoned his cart and hurried toward the sound, his military training kicking in automatically. The noise had come from the advanced chemistry lab at the end of the hall. The door was ajar, safety regulations violated, and inside he found a young woman collapsed on the floor, convulsing. She was maybe 19 or 20, with striking features that suggested mixed alien heritage. Her skin had an unusual golden undertone that shimmered slightly in the lab's emergency lighting. Books and equipment were scattered around her, and a broken beaker lay nearby, its contents pooling on the tile floor. "Miss, can you hear me?" Marcus dropped to his knees beside her, his training running through emergency protocols. The girl's eyes were rolling back, her body jerking violently. Seizure. He needed to keep her from hurting herself, needed to call for help. He reached for his communicator with one hand while trying to gently turn her on her side with the other to keep her airway clear. The moment his bare hand touched her arm, everything changed. The girl's skin was burning hot, not fever hot, but scorching, like touching a heating element. Marcus jerked back instinctively, but not before he felt something else. A jolt of energy, like electricity, but different, more alive. It raced up his arm and into his chest, making his heart stutter. The girl's convulsions suddenly stopped. Her eyes focused on him with startling clarity, wide with fear and something else, recognition. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear over the alarm that had started blaring. "Help! Me!" she managed. Then her eyes rolled back again and she went limp. Marcus didn't hesitate. He scooped her up, ignoring the painful heat radiating from her body, and carried her out of the lab. Campus security and medical personnel arrived within minutes, and Marcus found himself pushed aside as they took over, loading the girl onto a stretcher and rushing her away. "Sir, we'll need a statement," a security officer said, pulling out a tablet. "What happened?" Marcus explained everything, hearing the crash, finding the girl, calling for help. He mentioned touching her to help, the strange heat, the energy he'd felt. The security officer's expression grew increasingly skeptical as he spoke. "You say her skin was burning hot?" "Yes, extremely, like nothing I've ever felt." "And you felt some kind of energy?" "I know how it sounds, but yes." The officer made notes, his stylus moving across the tablet screen. We'll be in touch if we need anything else. You can return to your duties." Marcus went back to work, but his hand still tingled where he'd touched the girl. He tried to shake it off, tried to focus on finishing his shift, but something felt wrong. Changed. By morning, everything had fallen apart. Marcus woke to find campus police at his door, their expressions cold and professional. "Marcus Webb, you're being placed on administrative leave pending investigation into allegations of inappropriate contact with a student." "What? I was helping her. She was having a seizure." "Sir, please don't make this difficult. You need to come with us." At the security office, Marcus was confronted with a nightmare. The girl he'd helped, whose name he learned was Zara Velshan, had filed a formal complaint. According to her statement, she had no memory of what happened in the lab, only of waking up in the medical center with burns on her arm where someone had grabbed her. "Burns that match your hand exactly," the head of campus security, Director Harrison, said grimly, sliding photos across the desk. Marcus stared at images of Zara's arm, clearly showing handprint-shaped marks on her golden skin. "I didn't burn her. I was trying to help." "Mr. Webb, witnesses saw you carrying Miss Velshan out of a locked laboratory you had no authorization to enter. Security footage shows you touching her when she was unconscious and vulnerable. And now we have physical evidence of burns matching your hand. She was convulsing. I heard her fall. The door was open. The door logs show no unauthorized entry. The footage shows you picked the lock." "That's impossible. I would never." "Furthermore," Harrison continued, his voice hardening, "Miss Velshan is Xinthian." "Do you know what that means?" Marcus felt his stomach drop. He'd heard of Xinthians, a rare alien species whose body chemistry was extremely reactive to certain stimuli. Their skin could burn at contact with incompatible biologics, and they were known to be particularly vulnerable to human bacteria and enzymes. "I didn't know," Marcus said desperately. "I was just trying to help." "Your ignorance doesn't excuse assault, Mr. Webb. Miss Velshan's family is very influential. Her father is Ambassador Velshan of the Xinthian Council. They're considering pressing criminal charges." The investigation moved swiftly and brutally. Within 48 hours, Marcus had lost his job, his access to campus, and his reputation. The story hit the news: military veteran accused of assaulting alien student. And suddenly everyone had an opinion. Social media exploded with outrage. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse where preliminary hearings were held. Marcus's lawyer, a court-appointed public defender named Sarah Chen, who looked barely out of law school herself, did her best. "The evidence is circumstantial," she argued. "My client maintains he was providing emergency assistance." But the prosecution had security footage, door logs, medical evidence, and the testimony of Zara Velshan herself, who insisted through tears that she didn't remember giving consent to be touched, that she'd woken up in pain with burns on her skin. Marcus lost his apartment when he couldn't make rent. His savings evaporated under legal fees and living expenses. Fellow veterans who'd once called him brother now avoided his calls, unwilling to be associated with an alleged predator. The engineering program he'd worked so hard to enter suspended his enrollment pending the outcome of the criminal case. He ended up in a shelter, sleeping on a cot among dozens of other lost souls, his entire life reduced to a duffel bag of belongings. At night, he stared at the ceiling and wondered how helping someone had destroyed everything he'd built. The trial was set for 6 months out. Marcus spent that time in a fog of depression and disbelief, watching his lawyer struggle against a prosecution team backed by the Zynthian embassy's considerable resources. The burns on Zara's arm had healed, but photos were introduced as evidence. Expert witnesses testified about Zynthian biology, about how human contact could cause chemical burns. Character witnesses described Marcus as a loner, someone who kept to himself, someone who might harbor resentments. The military veterans who'd served with Marcus were called, but their testimony was twisted. He was always good in a crisis, they said, meaning to defend him. The prosecution reframed it. A man trained to take action, regardless of consequences. A man who makes split-second decisions without considering consent. Through it all, Zara Velshan sat in the courtroom, her golden skin gleaming under the lights, her expression uncertain. Sometimes Marcus caught her looking at him with what seemed like confusion, as if she couldn't quite reconcile the monster she'd been told about with the man sitting at the defense table. The night before closing arguments, Marcus sat in his shelter bunk and composed a letter to his daughter, a daughter he hadn't seen in 5 years since his ex-wife had moved across the country and cut off contact. He wanted to explain, to tell her he wasn't the monster the news portrayed. But as he wrote, he realized he had no way to send it. His daughter had blocked his messages long ago. He crumpled the letter and prepared for the worst. The next morning, everything changed. Marcus was being escorted into the courthouse when a commotion erupted at the entrance. A vehicle pulled up, expensive diplomatic plates, and Ambassador Velshan himself stepped out, followed by his daughter Zara, but she looked different. Her skin was glowing brighter than Marcus remembered, pulsing with an inner light that seemed almost painful. "Stop!" Zara's voice rang out across the courthouse steps. "Stop this immediately!" Everyone froze. Cameras swiveled. Security moved to intercept, but Ambassador Velshan held up a hand, his expression grave. "My daughter has something to say," the ambassador announced. "Something that changes everything." Zara climbed the courthouse steps, her movements shaky but determined. When she reached Marcus, she fell to her knees before him, a gesture of profound significance in Zynthian culture. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I didn't understand. I didn't know what you'd done." "Miss Velshan, you don't have to," Marcus's lawyer started, but Zara cut her off. "3 days ago, I collapsed again," Zara said, her voice growing stronger. "Same symptoms as before, violent convulsions, loss of consciousness. But this time I was in my family's quarters with my father and our medical team present. They ran full diagnostics." She stood, turning to face the gathered crowd and cameras. "I'm not Zynthian, not entirely. My mother was human. She died when I was young, and I was raised in my father's culture. I always presented as Zynthian because of gene therapy I received as a child to help me adapt to my father's world. But the therapy is failing." Ambassador Velshan stepped forward, his alien features arranged in an expression of deep shame. "My daughter suffers from a rare genetic condition, a conflict between her human and Zynthian DNA. The seizures are episodes where her human genes are trying to reassert themselves. The burns on her skin weren't caused by Mr. Webb's touch. They were markers of her human DNA activating." The crowd erupted in confused murmurs. Reporters shouted questions. Marcus stood frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. "When Mr. Webb touched me," Zara continued, His human bioelectric field triggered a cascade reaction in my hybrid biology. It literally jump-started my dormant human genes. The energy he felt, the heat, that was my body recognizing his touch as compatible as something it needed. He didn't hurt me, he saved my life. The security footage, Sarah Chen said, suddenly understanding dawning. The door logs, they were altered. Ambassador Velshan lowered his head. When my daughter was brought to medical, I was afraid of what it meant that a human had triggered this response, afraid of the political implications. I used my diplomatic authority to modify the evidence, to make it appear that Mr. Webb had acted inappropriately rather than heroically. I wanted to suppress the truth about my daughter's hybrid nature. You let an innocent man's life be destroyed to protect your political reputation. Sarah's voice was sharp with outrage. Yes, the ambassador said simply, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for that choice. I told myself I was protecting my daughter, but I was protecting my pride, my position. I convinced Zara that her memory loss meant something terrible had happened, when in truth, the seizure had simply erased those moments. I planted suspicion and let it grow into accusation. Zara looked at Marcus, her glowing skin pulsing with emotion. I've spent the last 3 days reviewing everything, real security footage, medical scans, my father's confession. You saved me, Mr. Webb. And I destroyed your life in return. The trial collapsed within hours. Charges were dropped, apologies issued, settlements offered. But Marcus felt numb as lawyers and officials swirled around him, their voices distant and meaningless. He'd been vindicated, but vindication didn't undo 6 months of hell. It didn't restore his job, his home, his reputation. It didn't erase the nights in the shelter, the hatred in people's eyes, the crushing weight of being called a monster. Ambassador Velshan approached him as the courthouse emptied. I know nothing I say can repair what I've done, but I'm prepared to offer full restitution, financial compensation, public apology, assistance in rebuilding your life. Why? Marcus asked, his voice hollow. Why did you do it? You could have just told the truth from the beginning. The ambassador's expression crumpled. Because I'm a coward, because admitting my daughter is half human would complicate my political standing. Because I thought I could contain the situation before anyone noticed. I didn't think about you as a person, Mr. Webb. I thought of you as a problem to be managed. That's unforgivable. Zara stepped forward, her skin still glowing. The doctors say my human genes are fully active now. I need regular contact with human bioelectric fields to stay stable. Your touch that night, it didn't just save my life then. It gave me a chance at a real life, one where I don't have to hide half of who I am. I'm glad you're okay, Marcus said, and he meant it. Despite everything, seeing this young woman alive and healing meant his suffering hadn't been completely pointless. The weeks that followed were surreal. The story of Ambassador Velshan's deception and Marcus's false accusation became international news. Public opinion swung violently in Marcus's favor. Job offers poured in. The university not only reinstated his enrollment but offered him a full scholarship. His daughter, seeing the truth splashed across every news feed, reached out for the first time in years. But Marcus found he couldn't quite celebrate. The vindication felt hollow. He'd lost 6 months of his life, his dignity, his sense of safety in the world. He'd learned how quickly society could turn on someone, how easily a good deed could be twisted into something monstrous. He accepted a settlement from the Velshan family, enough to secure his future, to finish his education without working himself to exhaustion. But he turned down the media appearances, the book deals, the offers to tell his story. He just wanted to disappear, to rebuild quietly. Zara, however, wouldn't let him disappear entirely. She showed up at his new apartment, modest but comfortable, paid for by the settlement, on a rainy Tuesday evening. Her skin still glowed faintly, a permanent reminder of her hybrid nature. "I know you probably never want to see me again," she said when he opened the door, "but I needed to tell you something." Marcus stepped aside, letting her in. They sat in his small living room, rain pattering against the windows. "I've been meeting with other human Xynthian hybrids," Zara said. "There are more of us than anyone realized, children of mixed unions who have been hiding, struggling with genetic instability. Your touch that night, the way it activated my human genes. It's become the basis for a new treatment. Doctors are calling it the Webb protocol." Marcus felt his throat tight. "I didn't do anything special, I just tried to help." "That's exactly what made it special," Zara said softly. "You saw someone in distress and you helped, even though it cost you everything. Even now, knowing what my father did to you, you still say you're glad I'm okay. That's not nothing, Mr. Webb. That's extraordinary." "I'm not a hero," Marcus said. "I'm just someone who got caught in a nightmare. You're both. You're a good man who had a terrible thing happen to him, but what my father did doesn't erase what you did. You saved my life. You're saving other lives now, even if indirectly." Zara stood to leave, then paused at the door. "I'm starting a foundation for wrongly accused individuals, for people whose lives have been destroyed by false allegations. My father is funding it as part of his restitution. I'd like to name it after you if you'll allow it." "I don't want my name on anything," Marcus said immediately. "Then help me run it. Use your experience to help others. Turn this nightmare into something meaningful." Marcus wanted to say no. He wanted to focus on his studies, rebuild his life, forget this chapter ever happened. But he looked at Zara's earnest face, at the hope shining in her eyes, and he thought about all the other people out there who'd been falsely accused, who'd lost everything, who had no one fighting for them. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Over the following months, Marcus did more than think. He threw himself into the Foundation's work, using his story to shine a light on the flaws in the justice system, the rush to judgment, the way lives could be destroyed by false accusations and manipulated evidence. He spoke at universities, worked with legal reform groups, counseled others who'd been wrongly accused. His relationship with Zara evolved into something like friendship, cautious, complicated, but genuine. She was working on her own healing, learning to embrace her human heritage, becoming an advocate for hybrid rights. Ambassador Velshan resigned his position and dedicated himself to making amends, not just to Marcus, but to everyone affected by his deception. The political scandal that followed his confession rocked the Xynthian Council, but it also opened doors for greater transparency and hybrid acceptance. A year after that terrible night in the chemistry lab, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium at Riverside Academy, the same institution that had destroyed his life, as the keynote speaker for their interspecies relations symposium. "I don't tell my story because I want sympathy," he said, looking out at the sea of faces, human, alien, and everything in between. "I tell it because it matters. It matters that we question the narratives we're given. It matters that we don't rush to judgment. It matters that we remember the humanity of every person caught in the justice system, whether they're accused or accuser." He paused, letting his words sink in. I touched a girl's skin while trying to save her life, and I lost everything. But the truth came out, and that truth has changed countless lives for the better. Not because I'm special, but because people finally decided to look past assumptions and examine the evidence. In the front row, Zara sat with her father, both of them listening intently. Her skin glowed steadily now, a sign of health and balance. Beside her sat 3 other human Xinthian hybrids who'd benefited from the treatment her case had inspired. I can't say I'm grateful for what happened, Marcus continued. The trauma was real, the loss was real, and no amount of vindication erases that. But I can say I'm grateful for what came after. The chance to help others, the opportunity to make meaning from suffering, the privilege of working with people like Zara Velshan and her father, who chose to face their mistakes and work toward redemption. After the speech, as people swarmed around him with questions and thanks, Marcus caught Zara's eye. She smiled, tentative but warm, and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Marcus nodded in return. He'd lost everything after touching a girl's skin. But when the truth came out, he'd found something he never expected. A purpose, a community, and proof that even the darkest chapters could become the foundation for something bright and new. He'd never forget the nightmare of those 6 months. But he'd also never forget that sometimes the truth doesn't just set you free. It transforms you into exactly who you were meant to become. The janitor who'd tried to help a stranger had lost his old life completely. But in its place, he'd built something far more meaningful, a life dedicated to justice, truth, and the simple but profound act of seeing people's humanity, even when the world insisted they were monsters. And in the end, that made all the difference.